Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's Skills Share session. We have quite a full session this afternoon, so people are going to be coming in from the virtual waiting room in the next couple of minutes. But I suggest that we get started. It has just gone, I think, 2 minutes past 2. So I suggest we get started and kick off the show for this afternoon. As usual, the hosting responsibilities will be shouldered by Brad Watridge, Senior Partner and Strategist at Hot Mustard Africa. Brad, are you there?
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Give me the claps.
Ready to rock and roll, brother.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Brad. Once again, thanks very much for hosting. And we're joined this afternoon. We're very lucky to be joined by Shelley Hunt, Managing Director at Transcend Corporate Advisors, an expert in all things BBBE and skills development. Shelley, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Gordon and Brad, everyone else.
Perfect. Thanks very much, everybody. Brad, can I hand over to you? I'm, as usual, just going to go off camera to preserve bandwidth and so on, and sit back like the rest of the audience and enjoy the show.
No, absolutely. It's no problem at all. So, guys, thank you and welcome so much to the session. It's really nice to have you guys here. I see we're already 24 in the room. Don't forget, guys, that we are recording this. So if you do have a comment or a question, please, more than welcome to put it into the chat section. I will then pick it up from there and take that through to Shelley in a discussion format. So, Shelley, you ready to share the slides and let us get going?
Yep, super. Thanks, Brad.
That's perfect. And again, please all don't forget you can ask as many questions as you want. We won't penalize you. We won't get upset. I don't know, maybe Shelley will. She looks pretty tough.
No, totally not. Just really
but it's nice to see the same people in the room. It's very cool.
Brad, just let me know if all is well from a sharing perspective.
Yeah, everything's good. Okay, now it's perfect. Yeah, it's kind of in presentation mode.
Okay, great.
Great. So, Shelley, we're here today to talk around youth development apprenticeships in South Africa. And when we had this conversation on the phone and we were preparing for the session, I came in kind of really optimistic to say, this is amazing, this is great, this is beautiful. Being Brad, this is exactly what we need as a country. And you were like, Brad, I love what is happening, but there are also issues that we need to pay attention to. And I think that's what you're going to take us through is kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly around youth development and apprenticeships.
Yeah, I think as South Africans, sometimes we become anesthetized to the contextual environment that we find ourselves in. And before we dive into the specific topic, sometimes it's good just to take stock and evaluate where we've come from, where we are, where we want to be, and the why as to what we're trying to achieve at the current point in time. So I thought before we dive straight into sort of youth development and the avenues in which we can develop in youth and the ROI in developing youth, maybe just set the scene as to South Africa as a country and the skills landscape in South Africa and the skills landscape, more importantly, in this sector in South Africa. So that was the direction I was going to take this session on. Yeah, if you're comfortable, I'll kick off.
Yeah, I think let's jump into it again, guys. This is an interactive session. I'm sure you may want to hear from Shelley all the time, maybe not from me so much, but please comment, share your reactions. I think we can get the best out of the session if you're asking questions and Shelley can respond to those questions. I think that's really going to help us focus down onto where you guys feel like you need a little bit of help and support. But Shelley, yeah, let's go for it. An idea of where we are as a country, I think is a good start. What the news? Good, bad?
Great, cool. And Brad, please just stop me if there's a question. I can't always see them when I'm presenting. So.
No, I'll take care of that. No problem at all.
Great. So Transcend, as Gordon and Brad introduced, is a BE consulting company. And so often we get tasked with engaging in local and foreign multinationals and convincing them to invest in South Africa over and above what they're doing from a business point of view, which is sometimes quite a tough sell. And so before we go into the room, we often sort of litmus test the sentiments of South Africa and BEE and the initiatives put in place and try to understand whether they think they're working. And we do this on an iterative basis because sentiments change, where we were pre-COVID to during COVID as to now, and all the other things that have happened since then, it changes and it's not static, it's fluid. And what's quite interesting is when we did that, it's not a pretty picture. I think people are tired. People are dealing with a lot in South Africa, and we want to see change. And so how do we measure? How do we measure if BEE is working, if South Africa is going to work? And how do we as private sector participate meaningfully in a system that may be broken? So we looked at many statistics, but one of the more interesting ones that shows, how is South Africa doing on a global basis? And if you ever play around, if you're statistically minded, there's an amazing tool called Gapminder, which you can go on for free and play around and put in many metrics, and it will pop out the statistic that you're looking for. And so this graph basically demonstrates the life expectancy of different countries worldwide in correlation to the average GDP or income per person. And you can see that there's a linear correlation between the two metrics, quite tight linear correlation, which makes perfect sense. The more money an average citizen has, the more they are equipped to deal with and protect against the ravages of poverty and crime and live a longer, more socially and economically engaged life and participate in the economy more meaningfully. That's not groundbreaking. You can see also what this graph is telling us is that the blue dots in the lower quadrant are African countries. So if that leads your eye better to where South Africa lies on the graph, you might be able to spot it now. But what's even more interesting is if you found South Africa, and I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, Brad.
Yeah, we can see it on the level 3. Yeah.
So we're pretty much an outlier below the line. And what that's indicating to us is that South Africa is not meeting the global trend. It's telling us that the amount of wealth in South Africa at the moment should be allowing us to live longer. And yet we aren't. We are dying far too soon. Why could this be happening? Why are our South Africans' life expectancy much lower? Because if we take that cursor and we fit the global trend, you can see that we should be hitting at least 10 years more. Could be from a variety of factors, and we'll go through those, and a lot of them have been highlighted in our National Development Plan as well as the BEE codes of what we're trying to address. But what this graph is telling us is there's an unequal distribution of wealth. So if the wealth was distributed equally, our population would be living that much longer. And we know that, right? We look at our poverty lines, and this always strikes me because I usually start presenting to my audience of local and South African committee members in the morning, and I've usually got my takeaway cup of coffee from downstairs, which costs in excess of 30 Rand. And then you look at these statistics. And the average, a quarter of South Africans are living on less than a cup of coffee a day. So there are 3 poverty lines. There's the food poverty line, which is about 800 Rand per month or 26 Rand per day, $1 a day. And a quarter of South Africans are living below that poverty line. And then you get the upper poverty line and the lower poverty line, they're combined. About over half of South Africans are living below that upper poverty line. So that 1,600 Rand per month is needed to cater for their needs. including education and skills. So we have enough wealth, but yet over half of our population is living below the poverty line, and a quarter of our population is living below all three poverty lines. It's linked, so we know that we're the most, I don't know if we knew that or if everyone knew that, but South Africa has been named the most unequal country in the world today. That picture could be really a picture in a multitude of places throughout our country, flying into Cape Town or, traveling into Sandton. You've got those highlighted structural inequalities that are represented in living circumstances. This just happens to be a suburb in the East Rand of South Africa called Primrose, highlighting the inequalities in our country. This is dangerous in and of itself. Now, I won't go into reasons, but I think we can all safely name a few. But in South Africa, this inequality and poverty crisis is linked to ethnicity. So you can see that of that quarter living below the food poverty line, that 25%. This is how it's broken down in terms of ethnicity. So about 65% Black, 40% mixed race, and 6% Indian Asian, with 1% being white. So we know we have inequality, we know we have severe poverty, it's linked to ethnicity, and it's causing our population not to have enough income to live and provide actively and engage in our economy to a healthy age. So how do we fix that? Well, many white papers have been
written. But I think, Shelley, it also, sorry, Shell, sorry to interrupt. I also think it talks to not only how do we fix that, but I think when we're talking through the apprenticeship process and learnerships, et cetera, we also got to take into account that a lot of the apprenticeships that are coming into our spaces come probably from this space. So that also affects on how we engage. Yeah, so, 100%. This also talks to the mindset at the moment of where we are, and from the person offering the apprenticeship to the person accepting it, there's actually, they're two worlds apart.
There's a huge
in terms of how they are living.
100%.
Yeah.
There's a whole range of external traumas, hardships, and income disparities where this learner is coming from. And for us to make it successful, we really need to understand that. You're 100% right, Brad.
Yeah, that's important for me.
You've kind of, we're going to roll on to that, but you've kind of stolen my thunder.
Sorry, Shelley.
No, I'm glad we're all heading towards the same mountain and the same thinking, because it's important. But I think just leading onto that, so globally, and Transcend has done a vast amounts of research based on global best practice of how do we actually transform countries that are dealing with income disparities linked to ethnicity, the likes of Malaysia, Brazil. We've done that research, and in every single instance, it's not rocket science. Growth needs to happen. So an economy needs to grow in order to transform. Why do we say that? Otherwise, it's the Robin Hood effect. You're stealing from one to give to another, and there's a net zero-sum game. So for more people to participate in the pot needs to grow, and that means we need to grow as South Africa.
Hi.
Yes. Was there a question? Sorry, I can't. Yes.
No, I think I don't know if there was a question. There was no hands up. So sorry, man, if you can just soldier through the person that had their mic. Yeah, their mic undone. So where we are right now is if I understand correctly, Shelley, we're setting the situation around we're kind of setting the scene of where we are as a country, because that's going to affect how we talk through the apprenticeship and the learnerships, etc. So we're just establishing kind of where we are. I think a lot of us know that we are an unequal. I think a lot of us can see it, but I don't think we truly understand that it comes into our businesses as well. It's not something that you leave at the door when you drive into your business estate. You kind of leave that outside. that comes in the form of the apprentices that are coming into your business.
I also think, Brad, that how we view our skills strategy, our transformation strategy, our BE strategy should not be viewed in isolation to our business strategy. Why do I say that? So often companies come and go, well, just tell me how much I need to pay. What's the tax to comply? What's the skills development levy that I need to pay my CETA? Just tell me and I'll pay it. And with that mindset, that's a non-value creating approach. What the slide is saying is we need to grow, and we need to grow our socks off for the next 5 years in order for us to transform as a country and be a place where we can continue to operate as businesses in South Africa. And if we're only viewing compliance or skills development as a cost, then we're barking up the wrong tree. We've got
and we also need local, and also, Shelley, we need local policies. I think that a lot of the policies that we bring in, and I know that you're going to get into this, but I really feel like I need to raise it now around a lot of the policies that are introduced to help resolve this issue are global policies that don't necessarily work in a country with the highest inequality rate. I think this is something that we have to solve, and I think that's what you guys do on a daily basis. But as business owners, we need your support in solving this with localized answers, solutions.
100%. So I think the later part of the conversation, and that's where I feel that I perhaps cannot be as value adding, is we need to localize it to South Africa, but not only to South Africa, we've got to break down the barriers to our very own sector and to our own talent pipeline needs.
Okay.
And I can try and speak to that, but how lucky are you to be in a collective where you can brainstorm and collectively solve for that? Because I think that's what's needed. And so I think, we can go on this pathway, but I think we're already there. So we need to grow. How do we grow? Well, we need a more engaged workforce. How do we get a more engaged workforce? We've got to invest in skills to get them there. We've got to supply the development engine to get a higher tax paying economy into the pipeline, right? So skills is part of the equation in getting us to where we need to get to. Are we investing in skills? Absolutely. The 24-25 budget speech said that approximately 20% of the budget has been ring-fenced to invest in education and skills programs, as compared to global powerhouses like the UK and the US. That's a far higher proportion of budget allocated to skills and education than those countries or nations. 20% of our budget. So what's going wrong? Why do we have more than half of our population living below poverty lines? And I don't know if anyone is aware of our unemployment rate, but our youth unemployment rate is heading towards 50%. Our expanded youth unemployment rate is more closer to 60%. So now we're sitting with an unemployed workforce, which we've seen in global situations is cause for revolt. When you've got unoccupied minds sitting around doing nothing, that is a dangerous place to be in. So we need to address that. And corporate is going to create jobs. Brad?
Yeah, I just, from my side, Shelley, I honestly, if you look at this, and look at the industry that we're in, I find that there's a very small translation from this budgetary spend at government level to actually into grassroots kind of policy and business by business change. So it's something that maybe we as an association, as Gordon, and maybe this is a conversation we can have outside of this, where we do get together and start to figure out and navigate on how we're going to handle this, how are us as members going to handle the situation, and how are we going to create, because it's obvious it's not trickling down from government. The policies and everything is there, but it's just not coming down at all. I don't know, Shelley, we've got a comment from Shrey. She says, as individual companies, it is tough to make a sufficient impact. We must act as a collective to ensure high impact to close industry gaps. So Shelley, as an association, and I hope we're not diverting away from your planned presentation, but as an association, can we do that? Can we come together as a collective and really solve it as a group?
So I think, when we collectively took the budgets, the skills spend of all of our clients, and I posed it to my consultants the other day. I said, if you had a budget of 50 million rand to do whatever you wanted in the skill space, what would you do? And they had great ideas. They had great ideas that could actually move the needle. And then I said, but each of you do have access to that budget in your client base. And so I think that is the only way that we're actually going to move the needle. If everyone comes together, does a barrier analysis, understands what the industry challenges are, and then rally together and putting that spend, which they probably are going to be spending anyway, towards industry challenges. I do think, and we're seeing more and more of that. I think, Brad, when we did have our conversation, the spotlight has also been a lot on entrepreneurial stimulation in South Africa, because that's said to create jobs within our SMME space. From a BE perspective, South African companies need to invest roughly 3% of their profit on an annual basis in supporting small business. And yet, are we seeing substantial movement or difference being made in it? And arguably it's no. So I'm sure everyone in the news has seen that the DTI has put together a plan for a transformation fund, where there'll be a collective pot of everyone's ESD funding to deal with challenges that are experienced by more than one, and have a scalable pot of funding to address those. So I think we should get ahead of the game, and as an industry be doing that already, because really that's the only way that we're going to have the required effect, the requisite effect that we need. So yes, absolutely. And I guess it's in collectives like this where that all starts. So yes.
Shelley, from our, sorry, man, I hope I'm not interrupting you there, but from our side, I actually have a personal question around this. So if, for example, I'm a business owner in the space and I am required to kind of spend a bit of money, or I have an inclination, and I look at my environment and go, look, I need a whole bunch of young apprentices coming into my business. But I'm cock scared, because if I bring these guys in and I spend money on them and I train them, because it does cost us as business owners, not just our time. There's a value exchange there. And the oaks either immigrate or they duck and they just don't come back to work and they move on to my competitors. From that perspective, what advice could you give me to kind of drop that perception I have? Do you have any reassurance that this can be done?
So I think, and I guess the next slide, I think if we just try and plug in and solve for problems that are now emerging at the end of an apprentice, we're kind of going about it the wrong way. We've got to start at the basic building blocks and work up from there. So, I don't understand the statistics of the pass-through of apprentices in South Africa right now. I don't understand what the need is versus what the actual throughput is. I don't understand, because there seems to be a supply and demand element, that we train up the apprentices, but then our competitor will steal them. So is there a supply and demand, and why is there a supply and demand issue? Is it we don't have enough people entering into the apprenticeship space? Is it because the dropout rate is high? Is it because the training institutions are insufficient? Is it because the mentorship and leadership and succession planning is not there? It could be based on numerous different factors which need to be examined and tackled. But that's why I think we always approach it in a systemic way. And I'm not sure, so here are the statistics. In this space, I imagine STEM being important, numeracy and literacy, and those caught my eye. So we're investing, or government is investing, a huge percentage of our budget, but of grade sixes in South Africa, only 12% are numerate, and about 50% are literate, and that's not great, because if you look at our compatriots, the likes of Botswana, Kenya, Mozambique, Zanzibar, Zimbabwe, are all ahead of us, way ahead of us in terms of literacy rates. And that is, why is that? Because I've highlighted it in the orange, and I'll just read it to you. The recent work on inequality in South Africa's education system has found staggering disparities in educational outcomes, to the degree that the life chances of the average South African child are determined not by their ability or result of hard work and determination, but instead by the color of the skin, the birth province, and the wealth of their parents. So here we go, and we invest all this money into skills development, and yet we still don't see successful apprentices materializing. Why? Because they've already been given this lot in life that's going to predetermine where they end up. They've got family debt, they've got families to look after at home. So we've got to go back to basics, and we liken it, and I'm going to get to your point, Brad, but often we liken this thought process by referencing, I know it's old school, but it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if we wanted a well-functioning skills development or pool of apprentices that when we train, stay within our company, within our industry, within our country, what will that take? Well, we can't inject a solution into there. We've got to go back to basics and understand where we need to start. So for BEE purposes, we often say, well, the most optimal state is the tip of Maslow's triangle, being self-actualization, becoming the best version that we want to be. But there's a series of building blocks that have to be addressed before we get to that apex, and the order of those building blocks are equally important. So if you say, well, gosh, if there's one thing I could change in South Africa right now, it would be unemployment. With 60% of our youth sitting around idle, I'd want that to change. I'd want more taxpayers. I'd want, a more engaged workforce. Yes, that's my magic. That's the wish I want if I had magic. But unfortunately, if we create jobs, great. But if we don't have the requisite talent pool, that's a problem. If we have the requisite talent pool, but they are sharing their wage with 20 other people within their families, that's not going to work either. They're going to be hot. So we have to look at all of those to come to a solution. And so the BEE skills card, and I'm going to focus on the human capital top part, goes the bottom rung of Maslow's is socioeconomic development. So that deals with grassroots level issues. So saying the things like the National Development Plan deal with. We can't send kids to school if they're hungry. It's been proven, especially in early childhood development, that a malnourished child cannot learn, right? So you've got to go back there and you've got to, okay, well, let's look at our food security, our water security, our safety, our roads, our infrastructure, get our kids to school safely. Then maybe we can tackle how they are skilled within the formal confines of our education system. So you've got to start with socioeconomic development. And then moving on from there, we go, right, what are the skills needs of our sector, and how is the institutions catering for those? And fund as a collective where you think could move the needle. The next layer is then readying them for work. So Brad, you also referenced earlier that there's a disparity between the learner that's coming in and the learner that corporate expects, just simply because of the circumstances that they've come from, right? And how do we close that gap? Well, that's what the BEE codes, and again, I'm likening this to codes because it is my frame of reference, that's what we should be doing in our apprenticeship programs and our learnership programs. Understanding where they're coming from and where they want to go through, or where they want to go to, and eventually entrenching them so heavily within our organizations and in our sector that they do form part of our management control, which in other words is our workforce or our employment. And then oh gosh, I'm going backwards, my apologies.
No, it's okay.
Employee share ownership programs to filter into ownership. So I think the next slide I put not there. I said, can we solve for it? Well, the investment does need to be strategic. It needs to be high value adding, not seen as a cost. And it needs to be systemic, address systemic challenges. It needs to be done as a collective, because I think piecemeal solutions won't work. And we really have to look at addressing the barriers and industry needs. So not only South Africa, but bring it closer to home. Really get to grips with what we as an industry are looking for and how we can solve for them. Long-winded answer.
I think it's talking through this whole entire concept of expectation versus reality. But Shrey raised a good point around, I'll just read a little bit of it at the beginning. She says, business needs to come up with solutions and put pressure on government to support us. We know what we need far better than they do. And I think it's we have this weird notion that government will come up with the solutions, that somewhere along the line they will turn the tide and come up with good governance policies and actually be able to implement them efficiently. But it just doesn't happen, and it will not happen. That lobbying, that sense of us as an industry, us as an association getting together and drawing up a white paper around how we deal with apprenticeships, knowing that the apprentice is going to rock up not as what we expect, but as the reality of what they reflect. And I think that's really important for me. That's a key takeaway. I know that Wilma also had a comment saying current labor legislation, i.e. the Employment Equity Act, directly impacts our businesses. Companies are looking for ways to restructure and reduce headcount, opposed to employing people and focusing on skills development. But I think that talks to that frustration of, well, I do bring people in, I do employ people, but the bigger my company gets, the actually less profitable I become, because I have all these labor issues and policies and all these things I have to deal with. I'd rather automate, use artificial intelligence, streamline my business, and actually circumnavigate my responsibility to do this. But there's a social element here, isn't there, Shelley? Isn't there this sense of giving back? How do you feel about that?
So I think it's both, but I think, as referenced before, South Africa has to grow, first and foremost. I don't think it should come at the price of compliance. So, Wilma, I agree with you. I agree that there is a cost to compliance, but one should try and mold it in such a way that you can validate that whatever investment you are plugging into compliance will yield a return. Brad, I hate to say it, but there is no spare money in South African corporates to give away. We have to be fairly, strategic about our investments. There is a social element, absolutely, but it can't come at the price of growth, because we have to grow to employ more people. And if we don't employ more people, then our unemployment rate, so we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can't cut off an arm to prevent losing an arm and a leg. We've got to look at it in a way that we comply, but in a way that is strategic and has a positive ROI. And again, I only believe that will work if you've seriously diagnosed what your problems are as an industry collective, because otherwise you're just shooting from the hip and spraying, praying, okay, fine. How many apprentices do we need? Okay, 10. Okay, fine. How many need, no, rather look at it. What is going wrong at the basics? And I think I've got a slide in here where I say you can actually use, and I don't know your industry as well as you, but I think what I did try to do for you is I tried to map, right, if we had to start at the basics. So, I've dealt with a lot of different sectors where they're saying, just there's a lack of awareness that this is a career option, or it's seen as a career that is always going to be blue collar, or it's a career that is never going to be fitted within my culture, or whatever it is. And I think there is a career awareness, career orientation, which is needed amongst our youth. That's changing as well, with what's scary with AI and, words that I don't even know, how that's influencing the futures of our youth is pretty scary. But yes, if we've got to bring that about, and if they want to enter into the sector, what do they need to do about their basic building blocks, like their subject choices and their marks within maths and science, etc. So I think there's how I saw it, there was career orientation, foundational training, artisanal training, workplace trade certification, and employment. And so how does that all fit into the BE scorecard? How can you leverage that? And we've said, well, you can actually use socioeconomic development towards career orientation.
I see.
So
It links to the,
if you want to spend that 1% and obtain those 5 points on the scorecard, don't go and paint a classroom for Nelson Mandela Day, please. Rather, as an industry body, create a really snazzy like career orientation program or career awareness to target grade 7, to make sure that they ready themselves in terms of subject choices and marks and support structures to enter into that career choice, right? So you can use your socioeconomic development. Now, for me, yes, it is not invested directly in your employee base, but there is such a huge ROI for me if it was done that sort of way. And then I've sort of said, well, you know, and we can cut and paste this, but you can see how I've sort of said, well, in this career talent pipeline, you can actually marry it onto the scorecard to ensure that you leverage the investment that you make. So using the BE scorecard to get the outcomes you're looking for. Yeah. And I've married it to the skills matrix, which is also within the BE codes, and shows us how each training counts towards different places, as well as the YES program. So I think I'm assuming a lot of the people on this call are aware of the Youth Employment Service under the auspices of the DTI, which encourage employment of unemployed South African youth, and then rewards you by enhancing your level on the BE scorecard by participating in the program. If there is a need for me to go more into detail on the skills scorecard or the YES program, I can also do that, Brad. I'm not sure.
So yeah, I think let's leave it up to because this is a skill share, so we want to learn something from this. We may want to go into that. So anyone listening in would like us to go into more detail around the YES program. Am I saying it right, Shelley? YES program?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, all right. But yes, so basically you just let us know and we will go into it. But I actually have a question. Gordon, I don't know if you're with us still, brother. You're just listening in. You know, from an association perspective, yeah, I mean, what are you thinking at the moment? I know you've commented it a bit, but if you could just give us your thoughts.
Sure.
Around this.
Look, you know, it's hard. I think that I'm in agreement with everything that Shelley's saying. I think that, you know, I'm very, very worried, in particular about the unemployment rate. You know, if one looks at the stats, and obviously just due to the nature of what I do, you know, I follow them quite closely, mainly in the form of the quarterly labour force survey that comes out on a regular basis. You know, the unemployment rate is a massive, massive concern, and we see it, you know, obviously in terms of the facts and figures and that, but we see it at company level as well. When you know, just chatting to the guys on the shop floor, and everybody in the audience will agree with me, I'm sure, that we hear, you know, endless stories about how employees have to look after extended families that include adults, multiple adults who are unemployed. You know, so it's no surprising the stats that Shelley has shared. It makes complete sense to me. You know, why so many people live below the poverty line, including people who do earn an income, maybe even a decent income in the sense of what they earn as an hourly wage, might even be quite decent. But the minute you've got to share that with 10 people, you know, then it's no longer decent, and it's no longer anywhere near sufficient enough to, you know, to provide any sort of acceptable living standard. So you know, I think that it is one understands the frustration of companies, because in order to address that unemployment rate, you know, I think that it's going to need massive reform that needs to be driven by government. When I say driven by government, I mean they need to make you know, they need to put in place the framework to allow that to happen. Companies are the ones who are going to create the jobs. But government needs to be able to allow that to happen. Whereas, in fact, I think, the experience oftentimes of companies is the opposite, where we've got so much to deal with, so many other things that we need to worry about, that the last thing on our minds is actually going out and employing more people. We try and avoid it sometimes because of all the regulation. Deregulate, and I think the rest would happen, well, I say naturally. I mean, that's what businesses do. They get people, working, and they get economies moving. So, whether or not that's going to happen,
Gordon,
we'll have to see.
Brother, to interrupt, but I think that the question is it really happening? And Shrey's just raised her hand. If we could unmute Shrey, please, because I think Shrey is going to talk around what we need to do on a ground level. Like how do we, because if our reliance is on government, we know that this is going to create even more frustrations for us. So it's how do we as a collective pull together and solve these fundamental issues that Shelley has raised? Shrey, what is your thoughts?
So I think, Brad, Shelley raised at the beginning a really important point, and essentially is, as an association, have a platform to come together, because we already are a combination of many companies, but perhaps we need to start working closer together to understand these are our common issues and come up with a plan collectively on how to resolve it. And I think Shelley is raising so many important points, and I hope that everybody listening is really, really paying attention to this, that, guys, we are spending this money already. We have a platform to come together already. So we need to start maximizing on that opportunity. And I think, Gordon, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think there is a big opportunity for us, and we really need to apply our minds to give our members that opportunity to come together and resolve our industry issues.
Shrey, would it be in the form of a framework? Just thinking about the practicalities around it, would it be a framework that we offer the members about, like, this is how we understand, this is the issues, and this is what we suggest, how you approach it?
Absolutely. I think number one is identifying our common issues. So I might have ideas about that, Gordon might have ideas about that, but maybe we need to send out some surveys and come to agreement that these are the main issues we want to resolve. Once we have that, it's who are the stakeholders that we need to get in touch with in order to be able to achieve that. And then number three is, what is the framework? What is the solution to help us get there? But I think there is a step-by-step in order for us to build that framework, is for, again, myself, Gordon, and to be honest, with Shelley, we have brainstormed some of this already, but it is important to put it to the members to also get their input and make sure that we're all aligned in terms of what are the main issues we want to resolve and focus on, and from there, move forward.
Yeah,
Shelley,
yeah,
us here too. And I mean, Karine was also saying she totally agrees with this. She's just messaged us now. So I think the members are asking for this. So Shelley, what are your thoughts?
So I think this is not, I guess we've deviated from just a skills conversation to, I think this is good for business conversation. I think regardless of compliance and legislation, you should be doing this as a collective. What with all the business risks that from an AI, from a skills deficit or replacement and a global stage that we're now playing on, it would only make business sense to come and assess the lay of the land together. Has it been done before? Yes. Has it been done in South Africa before? Yes. Some good examples of where industries did this well was back in the early 2010s. I think it was the automotive cluster down in KZN came together and formalized, I can't remember what it was called, but it was the automotive cluster, and how they could address things like employment, localization and manufacturing, support of supply chain and using small businesses within the sector. And we did manage to make a dent in the automotive sector. Has it stuck? Maybe not. But I think it was up to the industry players to make it work. So I think it's good business practice. I think it's necessary to keep us in business And I think it can be done. I think it does need capacitation and resource. I think if you've got resources, we can cleverly think about how we can capacitate and resource through compliance costs. So, for example, if we wanted to put together a framework, why don't we all pull together the socioeconomic development funding and build a framework? Or if we wanted to understand how to, we don't want to increase our employee base, but we perhaps want to look at optimizing supply chain, how do we do that in a way that is good for South Africa, localizing, creating jobs, not displacing skills through completely tech, type of things. Let's put our enterprise and supplier development funding in a pot and solve for it collectively. And then over and above that, so again, Brad, I'm using the scorecard as a framework, but there are other, and I've listed them there, and everyone is probably more or less familiar with at least a couple, but there are other avenues to access funding in specifically, the skills development space as well. Some industries, especially the retail industry, use the skills development scorecard as a net sum gain. So they actually come out with a net positive by upskilling through the likes of tax rebates and grants, et cetera. So yeah, I think if we're intentional about it, and as I say, in order to make it scalable and sustainable, there has to be a couple of players. Yeah.
So Volvo was saying that the new QC2O curriculum, I don't know if I'm saying that, for apprenticeships rely a lot on businesses to provide the practical training to learners. Companies do not have time for this, so we need to establish training colleges that can take care of the first round of practical training. Then businesses can step in and do the final work. What's your thoughts on that, exploring that option for us?
Yeah, I love that. I'm not 100% a QCTO expert, but conversations with other industries, I think there is lacking in the space. I think and I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but our interaction with the QCTO and the CETAs and the transitions between the two is that they are perhaps not as well resourced as they need to be, and they haven't thought through all the inefficiencies or gaps that are in the system, and they're looking for private sector to come up and help problem solve. And so if we put forward solutions and solved our problems, but if we can't do the training and developed a training center and made sure that the QCTO accepted and it aligned with the BEE codes, et cetera, I think that would be amazing and possible.
Yeah, Shrey was commenting around there are really great training institutions that we could assist with this, but I think the start is combining our efforts and coming up with that framework. I think that's the plan as an association and spill over as the industry. And I think if we work on this, if it exists, maybe we can adapt it or relook at it, but adapt it, adopt it as members and really drive that agenda as a collective. I don't think you can work alone on this. It's for me, it's frustrating. And as a small business owner, you get disillusioned so quickly because you have other things that are constantly pushing back, that you have so much pushback that at the end of the day, you just throw your hands in the air and think, you know what, my competitors are not doing this. That's making them more agile. That's giving them a competitive edge for now. But yet I've got to do all of this, and that's making me slower and not as competitive. But Shelley started off a bit depressing,
Yep.
With the stats and everything. But as South Africans, we're ever optimists. You've slowly moved into a space, giving us a solution as an association, and you spoke through, and you've even shown us here on this slide. Is there anything else you want to present through that you feel is relevant for us today?
So, Brad, I'm sorry to have started off on a low note, and it was not.
Okay.
It was intentional. I think in any change management form, there has to be a wake-up call. There has to be a need to act, and as an industry, you need to decide what that spark plug is. I believe that there's enough of a need for action to be taken, but everyone on this call is likely going to be the ambassador for the cause. So we need to understand what hill we're marching towards, and whether you use fear tactics or optimism is up to you. There is a need. South Africans, and Brad, it's funny because we call this our narrative. We change it and it's in a state of flux continuously. We do market surveys and market sentiment. But what comes out is South Africans are resilient. South Africans are problem solvers and innovative and glass half full. And so I believe we've got a lot going for us, that we can actually use this as a leapfrog to other competitive spaces and use it for high growth. I think, I did do so I can share the presentation, but I went into all the details of what all of these avenues of funding entail and how you can access them. I did try and highlight perhaps what some of the challenges are within this sector specifically, but it would be good to understand, from everyone on the call, if these are the challenges you're facing. So in my talent pipeline, sequential ordering from career awareness, I said maybe what you could tackle is there's lack of role models, limited career guidance, poor maths and science base. For foundational training, this is what I've sort of pinpointed could be the challenges you're facing are high dropout rates, under-resourced TVETs, curriculum not industry aligned. Artisan training, weak employer engagement, fragmented system, insufficient workplace placements, workplace learning, mentors, learner oversight, exploitation, trade tests, limited test centers, high failure rates, retest costs, post-quals, underemployment, no career ladder, poor RPL access. And then, I listed beyond that. So as we said, loss of talent through immigration and internal poaching, tech displacement and generational gaps. And I mean, these are my thoughts of the issues, and then I've problem solved and tried to think of, and I'm not going to share them because perhaps engagement is better than oversharing. But solutioning around, so I'm doing a diagnostic of what the challenges are, understanding if we're aligned and we're all facing them, and then how we can come together to problem solve, and what funding avenues or compliance funding avenues we could use to tackle them. I can go through them.
So I think, I think the conversational element and the engagement between all of us is kind of really important for us, because it's kind of sharing the skill. It puts so much work into this. So first of all, thank you very much. I think this is so incredibly detailed, and making this available for us, we would be appreciated if you're prepared to do that, and we give it to the members. But I think it's done for me, and I don't know if Gordon agrees. I know Shrey's on board, but I think it leads to the next thing as an association. Can we build that framework? Can we start? Because this is a lot to absorb, and if I'm a business owner and I have 100 and other things, and I've got to pick the kids up at 2 p.m. and make dinner at 6, this is going to be difficult to get through. So if the association can take this, build a framework, and consult with its members in a way that is absorbable and usable for the member, I think the buy-in. What we tend to do as South Africans is we tend to have bar conversations around business strategy. We tend to sit and go, okay, and that's assumption. Johnny next to you tells you about his bad experience with their press. Joe next to you on the right tells you the same story. You then get influenced. Framework that is built on sober conversation and given to the members as a guide, I think that's incredibly powerful. It could be a huge game changer. Gordon, I don't know, what's your take on that, brother? What are you thinking? Sorry, I'm calling you up again, Butty. I hope you're not getting coffee.
No, not at all. No, 100% agree. I mean, I think that, it is a daunting task, but we have to do something, and whatever role the association can play to make it easier, we must exploit that and leverage off it. So definitely 100% on board, yeah.
Fantastic. So, Shelley, believe it or not, we've got a half an hour left. Our sessions go to 3:30. So we've already been in for a full hour. Don't know if it feels like it on your side, but and you're not with us, and you've given us kind of
3 plates, cut the pie.
okay, someone's ordering lunch, but so yeah, it's all good. Let's get that person muted. I struggle with ADHD to talk through that. So yeah, Shelley, so for me, I would like to spend the rest of the next half an hour, and I don't know if everyone agrees, just talking through kind of, if you can, just for my sake, just dump down the next steps for me. So I'm a business owner, I'm in this industry, I really want to invest in the youth, and I really want to start or continue with my apprenticeship program, but I want to hire, I want a better result. I want to see a stronger return on this financially and obviously from a social perspective. What are the next 10 basic steps that I need to take? I know you've spoken through a few of them, but if you could just dumb it down for me, that would really help.
So I think, you know, we could narrow it down to the skills, the specific skills interventions, which I think is great. I think perhaps we always say what are going to have the highest value contributors to the industry as well as the businesses. So if you, regardless of compliance or BE or anything, if you could invest money into an area, where would it be to spearhead growth within the industry? And I think we've all agreed that perhaps a better equipped labor force or skills force is requisite. We just need to align, and then potentially there may be more specific skills areas that we want to focus on. I think we need to define perhaps what we feel is not working and do a diagnostic. As Trey said, I think it would be a good place to maybe do surveys and engagement or stakeholder engagement workshops. You know, as you say, time is a scarce commodity, so maybe using tech is the best way to go about it, as long as engagement is high. And then only once you've really got that diagnostic or gap analysis can you really start solving. These are guesstimates, what I've put here. What I have tried to prove is that you can solve for problems cleverly through compliance, but I can't this forum and these participants are best placed to give input into what they guess is the cause for what's going wrong. And then from that diagnostic, then start to flesh out how we can start to tackle, as I said, from a systemic point of view, from the baseline to the self-actualization point, and then rally together sizable investments to scale solutions so that we can all benefit from it as a sector. I know it's broad strokes, but I think, you know, you're moving an elephant and you've got to take bite sizes type of thing. But I think conclusively, we cannot just allow government and state funding to solve the solutions for us. It's got to be a joint effort.
I think it needs to, and I think that's the general consensus or the general scenario across every part of our life in the country, is we have to get involved from just, you know, your municipal level as an individual and as a business owner. You need to get involved because, you know, things are not moving and shifting the way we want to be 30 years into democracy, and we're not seeing the change we want to see. So as a small business, I have a tendency to you know, bring an apprenticeship in through somebody I either know, or, you know, it's never really something I take quite seriously. But bringing that, sourcing that apprentice is very important. Sourcing the right one. Shelley, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think there was two thoughts. I think positioning is everything. You know, champagne politics. We talk around the braai and we we give these type of things a bad rep. We've got to reframe it, and we've also got to reframe it to the beneficiary, because unfortunately it has created adverse behaviors, toxic behaviors within our learner and apprenticeship base. Has it been done well before? Absolutely. We've done it with numerous multinationals where they've said, but we love what this is about. Can we put it under the framework of our international initiatives? Rename it. Don't call it a learnership. Don't call it apprenticeship. Don't call it accredited training. Make it an esteemed fought for prize, and cognitively change the way the learners or apprentices think about it. Create that scarcity and superiority about having that opportunity. That has worked. In terms of sourcing the right apprentices and getting them into the program and helping them thrive, one of my colleagues, sorry, I hope you don't mind, Polani, is on this the call with us. And, you know, probably 5 years ago, we did a diagnostic and we said, are we comfortable? And it was specifically around persons living with disability. The scorecard gave way to not great behaviors about employing the same disabled learners year in and year out, evergreen learners. Learners were discouraged. They weren't finding permanent absorption. Companies were really seeing them as seat warmers and points on a scorecard and tick boxing. And ethically, hand on our heart, as BE consultants, we couldn't advise our clients to participate in disabled learnerships simply because it wasn't having the intended consequences that it was supposed to have. So Oli spent a huge amount of time and research into developing not a whole fully blown learnership again, but a plug and play for specifically disabled learners. And we as Transcend backed it in terms of research costs and development. And we start off the program with a module about Carol Dweck's growth mindset. So I don't know if you are familiar with growth mindsets, fixed mindsets. Yeah. I'm born with what I have, especially when you're a person living with a disability. And how do we simply change their mindsets walking into a learnership? How do we make them aware of the environment and unemployment statistics that they're operating in? How do we unpack the traumas that they've dealt with? And how do we intrinsically evaluate what they're good at? I think, Brad, what's really sad to see, and I interview hundreds of learners per month that are lining up outside our door for job opportunities, is you ask them, what do you want to be in life? Why are you coming and handing in your CV? And they're like, I just want a job. And then you go, well, what did you study?
I just need the money.
Like, I studied something that I thought, whatever. So what we then also developed within this short course is a test with the University of Stellenbosch to intrinsically evaluate their intrinsic and inherent strengths. And what we found is often what the learner studied had nothing to do with what their intrinsic and inherent strengths were. So there in and of itself, career guidance way back did not take place. And now what's happened is that learner has accumulated all the student debt to study something that they're not suited for and is unlikely a scarce and critical skill in country, and they're stuck. And so your question, I think, was how do we recruit? How do we get? I can't remember. I've deviated. I've probably floated away.
No, but Shelley, I think I find it so interesting, and I'm sure everyone listening in finds it incredibly interesting. And if you would like to share, for those of you who are sitting in the session, and we haven't lost anyone, which means you guys are definitely interested, is share your experience around apprenticeships. We've got about 15 minutes left of the session. If it's been good for you, if it's been bad, if you feel like we've got a great formula, and if you feel like you've got your head around this, then please just share it with us. Put it on the group, because then Gordon can reach out to you and you can be part of that, that framework discussion. Shrey, you wanted to say something, a comment around that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Brad, that Shelley highlights some of the important barriers we face when it comes to apprentices and learners. And one of the things I put in the comments is we fail to identify that transformation goes beyond recruitment, learning and development, employment equity, triple BEE. It also translates into our IR processes. And often with IR, we're looking at it as, what's going to get us to pass at the CCMA without understanding who is the person that I am dealing with. Where do they come from, and how do I help them and support them to get over some barriers that prevent them from integrating into the workplace? And we've actually found that it is normal to have these high dropout rates, etc. In efficient engineering specifically, we don't have any dropouts. We take on about 30 apprentices a year, and we pass those 30 apprentices after 4 years. And yes, there's things that we still need to work on. The difficulty is that your foundational education phases, if we had addressed a lot of this before they got to that apprenticeship, we wouldn't be sitting with as much of a time investment needed from management to get that right. So we need to start focusing at basic education, secondary education rates, and then in your terms of tertiary or work readiness programs in getting this right, because then it's not as much energy when it comes to our IR practices to really help these individuals to integrate into the workplace.
And how much have you learned from this, Shrey? Cut your teeth a lot.
Yeah, look, I think I have the privilege of dealing with Shelley, and I think every time I interact with her, I come out 100 times smarter. So I think this has just been such a phenomenal session. And as I said, I really hope it's getting people thinking beyond compliance, thinking. We hear transformation and we think triple BEE. That is not what it is. It should be, I believe in a South Africa way. ... And we're filling in those dots together.
Yeah, and you kind of the success story that we can fall back on to say that, you have a lot to learn. There's a long way to go, but there's something working, and it's something, like you say, beyond just the scorecard. But I think one of the other things that I wanted to ask Shelley was, there needs to be an attitude adjustment with the business owner or the employer. Is that a rough night out at the pub and deciding the next day to have a fresh start? How do we try and transform our thinking to be ready for what we want to do?
Yeah, Brad, I love that. I think the next time I'll start with positive slides.
No. Yeah, it's just I remember the call. Look, we had that call, and I started off like, "This is going to be fantastic, and you're going to tell us what they're going," because I'm an ever optimist. But then you share the realities with me that got me thinking, and I did a little bit of research. And I think what you've done is absolutely amazing because you've set the scene. But it's very clear that we, sitting in this room, also need to adjust our attitudes and our approach to this. I think that's something that Shay's raised. How do we do that and still make money?
Yeah, so I mean, listen, we started off with, the bad news stories and where we are as a country. I think what's really encouraging, especially as, to make my vulnerabilities open, this is not something that I studied. I studied something very far off where I am now, and yet I've been here for 10 years. And I wouldn't be doing this if it was getting people BEE certificates. Is because when it works, it's just so encouraging, and it does work.
Okay.
I'll tell you a story that got me to this place. I was working in one of those big auditing firms, and off the side of the desk, someone said, "Do you want to help popularize the NDP, the National Development Plan?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, like sign me up." And so we did and it's a world-class piece of plan, right? It's based on global best practice, and it
Yeah,
really
that
hits the
is.
mark of where we need to go as South Africa. It's our Vision 2030. And so we started surveying our base of about 3,500 people at the time that were employees, and of that base, under 2% of professionally skilled employees knew what the NDP stood for, National Development Plan, let alone the chapters they're in or having read the chapters. Now, we can complain, but unless we've read the plan and actively give that plan feet, it's forever going to remain a plan. And we've got to be actively engaged with it and be willing to contribute in a positive manner. I think what helps encourage us to participate is hearing good news stories and best practice and case studies that have worked. And I mean, I'd be willing to share, perhaps maybe not always your sector aligned, but in other sectors and in other instances where there has really been an impact by private investment or just putting our heads together and coming up with collective plans to move the needle. But yeah, it starts with commitment and willing to all act for the same or aligned good, and then figuring out that plan and implementation.
Yeah, and also maybe just, maybe becoming a bit more learned around all the different programs that are out there, and really digging deeper than relying on an opinion of someone that may be influencing your decision around this. I think that's really important. You have to learn to become unemotional and really look at for what it is. And then when that success happens, that then allows you to then tap into that emotional element. But you've got to see this as a structure, as a framework. So I totally agree with Shrey. We've come to the end of the session, but how could we work with you? Do you work with smaller businesses? I've seen your premises, they're really beautiful, they're very intimidating, but do you work with smaller businesses? Are you open to conversations after the session? Can we share your details? How can we give value back to you for your immense amount of time you've put into this?
Yeah, so Brad, I mean, we like to call ourselves the advocacy network. So whether we help the companies directly or via the connector within the environment, we're always happy to help. You're most welcome to share our details. We do help smaller companies with compliance, with transformation, with change management. We help collectives think through. I think Shrey and I, as well as Gordon, have sort of had the inklings of that conversation. But yeah, in any way or form that we can help. I also have a whole team of experts when it comes to skills development. So I was walking into this with a bit of fear and trepidation because I am not the expert within Transcend on all things QCTO, CETA, Employment Equity Act, Skills Act. So if there are any more nuanced questions that the team has in terms of leveraging opportunities, or if it just happens to be normal compliance, they're also welcome to contact us.
That's absolutely amazing. What did you study for?
I'm a rehabilitating CA.
Wow, okay, that's still hectic though.
Yeah, so no, that would have bored me to death, and I'm very happy where I am now.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Shelley, for your time. I think we're going to hand it back to Gordon just to round up and finish off. So my colleague Nicole's in the room, and she will grab all the details and get that to Gordon, and then Gordon takes it, and we do what we need to do with it. I know with the previous speakers, we've had a few members reach out to those speakers. So anyone listening in, if you'd like to reach out to Shelley to have the conversation, or better still, reach out to Gordon, who can then, facilitate this framework and start the conversations. I hope I'm not committing to something, Gordon, on your behalf. Then do that. But let's start talking. Let's have the conversations. And thank you very much. You just put so much detail into this. I really appreciate it. And over to you, Gordon.
Thanks very much, Brad. And definitely not overcommitting me. I'd love to get involved and assist and help out and do whatever we can from the SAEFA side to get the ball rolling. Shelley, thanks so much. It's been a fantastic session. I couldn't agree with Brad more. Incredibly valuable session. So thanks very much for all of the effort and the time this afternoon that you've given to us. Everybody on the call, thanks very much for your participation. We really hope you've enjoyed it, and hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. As Brad said, please reach out to me. Let's continue this conversation. Let's continue to put in the work, and hopefully we'll get shorter rather than later to something really, really meaningful in terms of the way forward. Thanks very much, everybody, once again, and have a really great afternoon. I'm trying to think if we're close enough to the weekend. Not really for me to wish you a good weekend, but have a great rest of the week anyway. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you.
Gordon, I think it depends where you live. If you're in Cape Town, then the weekend starts tomorrow?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Never ends.
Yeah, but if you're in Johannesburg, a weekend starts. Yeah. Thanks so much, brother. Shelley, thank you so much. We're gonna drop off. Shelley, I'll just, if you don't mind, give you a call and just check in if you had a great time. And Trey, thank you so much for your guidance around this person as a guest. It was completely amazing. Absolutely. Chat to you later, Gordon.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Shelley. Cheers, guys. Bye.